Hi, my friends, Mrs. Real here with another installment of Jed and the Junkyard War. It's been a little bit since I've been reading to you. When last we left Jed, they had been searching different towns for his parents. And they had met a guy who could draw his parents from just the description from Jed's mind. So they had pictures, kind of like wanted posters. They're looking for information. But remember, he was never supposed to tell anybody his last name. And so when people kept asking, he could just tell them what his parents' first names were, Ryan and Mary. But it turns out that Ryan and Mary were kind of famous in the junkyard. Jed just didn't know it. So it turns out that Jed's parents, supposedly according to Sprocket, are the ones who started this whole junkyard war. They were copper. They disappeared into the fog for a long time, came back with an official gilded relic, which is not the treasure map watch thing that he's got. Shay says that's not fancy enough. It's just too silly to think it would be a gilded relic. So Sprocket thinks she might know a place where they can go, because not only were Jed's parents copper, which is what most of the dread turned out to be, but they were copper javelins. Javelins seem to be like the special, really extra special FBI spy, crazy ninja people that can do all kinds of things. So she said there's a secret javelin base about 900 scopes west. So they're going to now go to the next storm, according to the treasure map, collect all the stuff, get some fuel, and head west. It's going to be a long trip. Jed smiled to Captain Bog and said, "Thank you. Maybe you are thoughtfulness and warm hugs after all." Captain Bog said, "And maybe that's just your imagination talking." So I will share my screen with you. You can read along or just sit back and listen. And let's find out where this next part of the adventure will be taking us. Chapter 22. Tenacity. Jed tried to remind himself. He had decided last week that tenacity was the most difficult word in spaghetti. As they flew toward the storm, Jed wandered the deck. A light caught his eye. Spyglass. Again. The red light, as it had been every morning, was pulsing once again. "Would you stop that already?" he muttered. The head turned, and he could feel the empty eye and spyglass staring at him. "I think you and I are going to be good friends," it said. "Why do you keep saying stuff like that? You don't know me. You're just some clunk decoration." But as the words left Jed's mouth, his throat felt dry and pinched uncomfortably. "But I do know you. I know a lot about you. In fact, let's play a game to see how well I know you. It's called Guess What's in Your Pocket." He smiled. "I'll go first. I'm picturing something. Something round. Something yellow. How do you... No, it's not your turn yet. I'm smelling something. Something that smells like home and family." "Stop it." "I see Sprocket's thin voice shouted from the bridge, cutting off Spyglass. "Pavel, I thought you sprayed the deck last week." "Yup," Pavel called back. "I spray it down every rig day, sometimes even again on near day." "Then why's a gollig slug stuck here under the helm?" "We'll spy later," Spyglass whispered, "when fat janitors and shrill pigeons aren't squawking at each other." Jed pressed the button on Spyglass's head, and the light disappeared. "Get up here and scrape this thing off," Sprocket shouted. Pavel grabbed a plastic spatula and marched up the bridge stairs. "I'm a-comin'." A few moments later, he walked out, a purple slug stuck to the spatula. He smiled at Jed. "Ever taste one of these?" "I've had escargot, if that counts," Jed said. Pavel's brow scrunched. "Never eaten that can before. Not that I can recall, at least." His confusion shifted into something sneaky. "Hey, I got an idea. I'll give you a handful of batteries to take a bite right out of its back." Kaiser peeked around from one of the stacks. "Hold on. Make that 2 handfuls," he said. He reached into a pocket and pulled out some batteries. "But only if you swallow the bite." He slapped the batteries onto a table. "Are you crazy?" Jed said. "I'm not going to take a bite out of that thing." I'll put in a handful, Sprocket said from the top of the staircase. Bring the slug over here, Kaiser said, pointing to the table. You in on this, Shay? Kaiser asked. She strolled over closer. In on what? What are you all doing? Jed walked to the table. He poked the slug, and it made a squishing noise. Bite, 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 chanted Pavel. Bite, 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 Sprocket and Kaiser joined in. The whole crew was smiling and cheering. He couldn't help but smile back. Shay pushed her way through the group. Ew, Jed, don't! She leaned closer and whispered, Besides, you could get twice that many batteries, silly mouse. She stepped back and cringed at the slug. That's disgusting. Pavel stepped in front of her and slapped Jed's back. Don't listen to her. It probably tastes like blueberries or something. And just look at all them batteries. Sprocket looked over her shoulder. Hurry, before Captain catches me away from my post. And then another word from Spaghetti surfaced in Jed's mind. A word he'd once thought he'd never feel around this crew. But now he did feel it, or something like it. A word that made him consider, just for a moment at least, taking a bite from the back of a gooey slug. Gregariousness. By near day afternoon, they reached the storm. Pull us back, Sprocket, Captain Boggs said. I want a safe distance. Nothing hits the ship. Got it? Aye, aye, Captain. Gray clouds swirled in the distance and drew together. Get ready, Captain Bogg called. The clouds deepened into black. Old junk lifted from the piles and new junk fell. Everything whirled into a thick mass, crashing like thunder in a wild frenzy. No matter how many storms Jed witnessed, each was as terrifying as the last. The dark, whirling winds howled. Junk exploded in the air and clattered to the piles. Shay was giddy as always. Do you ever wonder where it all comes from? He asked her. The sky? The junk. I bet those mean clouds find pretty things and drink them all up. Then they get sick because they drank too many. Their bellies get gray and sad. Then... She paused and looked at Jed. Bleh! She shouted. They puke it all up. Jed laughed. But where do the clouds get it from? Clouds fly higher than any mouse's wings ever, even over sky stacks. You mean into the fringe? She shrugged. Maybe. Look like it's over, Captain Bogg nodded to Sprocket. Take us in. The propellers hummed and the ship lurched forward. The inky darkness had drained from the clouds and they were again a puffy white. Okay, Kaiser began. You know the drill. Once we land, Pavel clears stock space in the bay. Mess storage is packed 11 cans deep, deck to ceiling, so don't stop for cans. Batteries and ship repair. Nothing else unless you see, what was it called again, Jed? Smoked rattlesnake. Kaiser nodded. Smoked rattlesnake. Originally, he'd only cooked rattlesnake up out of curiosity, but the crew had loved it. Admittedly, it wasn't half bad out of the can. It had been years since he'd eaten rattlesnake. He thought of the desert camping trips he used to take with his dad. They'd roast a snake over the fire, then lie on the cracked earth and watch the sky change from a deep blue to volley incoming, Kaiser shouted. A bowling ball punched through the freshly white clouds and soared toward Bessie. Sprocket kicked a lever, but it was too late. The ball slammed into the deck and went straight through the ship as if the hull were made of paper. Everyone all right? The captain asked. Let's take her a bit slower, Sprocket. He searched the clouds. Still a few stragglers. Aye. Sprocket cranked another lever. A terrible whine whistled from the engine. She repositioned the lever and jiggled it. The screech worsened. Riggs yelled something from below. His feet pattered up the stairs to the main deck, and his head peeked up at them. What the clunk just happened? Kaiser pointed to the sky. Bowling ball. Went straight through Bessie. No, Riggs shook his head. It went straight through her engine. Captain Bogg spun around. It what? I need to shift power to the deflexor core, Riggs said. Will it hold? The captain asked. A brand new one? Definitely. One that's been on its last mile for the last 2,238 miles? I don't know. Any other options? Riggs shook his head. Do it, the captain said. Briggs hurried off to the engine room and paused at the staircase. If you hear something snap or see even a little green smoke, then, well, we're all going to die. So, he gave a two-fingered salute. It's been a pleasure, mostly. The crew waited in silence. Sprocket sat frozen in the command chair, gripping the ship's controls. Shay chewed her bottom lip. Kaiser paced in erratic circles. And Captain Bogg, motionless as ever, lifted his chin a few degrees, hands clasped behind his back. Nothing happened. No sound, no smoke. The core is connected, Riggs shouted from below, and it's taking the added payload. The crowd cheered, and the corner of Captain Bogg's lip turned up. He nodded to no one in particular. Then a snap sound echoed inside the belly of the tug. Metal clanged and rattled below their feet. Another snap, and another, each snap louder than the last. Everyone stared at the deck as ghostly tendrils of green smoke slithered through the metal planks. The strands of vapor joined together until the entire deck was bathed in green mist. Sprocket pulled a lever. The engine snarled and sputtered. Land the ship, Riggs shouted. Now! Sprocket tugged and shoved levers. The helm isn't responding. The final piece of metal snapped. The hum from the engine fell silent. Bessie was dead. We've lost propulsion, Sprocket yelled. Sky prop, now, Captain Bogg called. The nose of the ship tipped forward. They began to fall. Sprocket jammed a lever, and the sky propeller blades flipped into place. They started spinning, but it was too late. Wind rushed against Jed's face. We're going to crash. We're going to die. I'm going to die. Brace yourselves. Captain Bogg wrapped his arms around the railing. The sky prop whirred faster. Jed anchored himself to the smokestack. The once blurry brown of junk was now rich with detail. Sprocket yanked levers and stomped pedals, but nothing responded. The sky prop reached full throttle, and the tug began to slow. Lift, lift. Shay squeezed her eyes shut and curled around the cable next to Jed. She looked like a frightened mouse with nowhere else to hide. Sprocket released the controls and strapped the helm belts around herself. The sky prop shrieked as it struggled to slow the ship. It wasn't enough. Bessie rammed into a pile. 1 second, Jed's arms were wrapped around the smokestack, and the next they weren't. Where had it gone? Where was he? Where was it? He was staring at the sky, then at the deck. The sky, the deck. His limbs flopped around his body, weightless. He reached out. Grab something. You're going to die. Grab anything. His head smashed against something dense, twisting his neck in a way it had never twisted before. A pop echoed in his ears. His eyes shook, and the world became a splatter of borderless color. Nothing made sense. Nothing fit together. He tried to lift an arm, a finger. His body wouldn't respond. Stillness crept through his veins like venom. Pressure squeezed the air from his lungs, and the swirl of color before him faded into black. Chapter 23. The sky was the color of uncertainty. No, Jed thought, that doesn't make sense. He studied the sky, stared at the black splotches breaking through the clouds. They were bulbous and foggy and made his stomach feel like eggs. Eggs? That's not right either. What's happening to me? He tried to stand. His legs wouldn't respond. He looked down at his body, and thick horror oozed through his chest. They were gone. Legs gone, arms gone, everything gone. He screamed. The clouds darkened and roared. Black rain poured down, but it wasn't rain. It was oil splashing against him, covering his face, his eyes. My legs! I need my legs! More oil. I can't stand up. Somebody help! I'm going to drown! The oil poured from the clouds in great sheets. Jed coughed and choked. So much oil. Too much. It was heavy and thick and rose like water in a sink. It rose past his ears, past his chin. He clamped his mouth shut, and it poured over his face, over his eyes. Its weight pressed against him like a slab of stone. A dizzy blur seized his mind, and his consciousness faded. When Jed awoke, his skin felt slick and cold. His heart hammered against his chest. He swiped at his arms, trying to wipe away the liquid. Sweat. It's only sweat. His heart slowed, and he drew in a breath. I was dreaming. He checked each arm and each leg. They were where they belonged. His vision cleared. There was a woman in a red dress dancing in the rain. A painting. About time, the captain said. Been wondering when you would get your lazy backside out of my bed. Jed sat up. His vision swirled like a kaleidoscope. What happened? He rubbed his head. We were crashing. And then we crashed. And then you lazed about in my bed for 2 hours. Is everyone okay? They're not a bunch of scrawny babies who need 2-hour naps after Bessie has a bumpy landing. And Shay? Banged up. She isn't complaining, though. You get one scrape and you're out cold. Jed rolled his eyes. Yeah, I get it. He rocked his head from shoulder to shoulder. It had popped so loudly when he'd hit. Well, whatever it was that he'd hit. The porthole revealed that they were still grounded. I've been out for 2 hours? At least. But, sweat beaded his forehead, what about the iron and the copper? We're patching up as fast as we can. Crew's still looking for parts. Jed's heartbeat thudded in his cheeks. 1 hour. 2 at most. It's what you said. We have to get out of here. We have to hide. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. The captain patted his thigh. A pool cue and a yardstick wrapped with an orange scarf splinted the bone below his left knee. Is it broken? He shrugged. I'll bet you 30 batteries I could still climb a ladder faster than you. Jed gave a sympathetic smile. How long before we're found? I was expecting visitors a half hour ago. We've been lucky to make it this long undiscovered. Jed stumbled from the bed and made his way to the main deck. The impact had shredded the hull, and 2 of the main propeller blades were cracked. Riggs stood near a pile of gears and scavenged parts, flipping through his notebook. What can I do to help? Jed asked. Got any magnetic couplings or platinum fuses? I don't know what those are. Didn't think so, Riggs sighed. Go find a car horn, 3 feet of copper tubing, and a pickaxe. Check the back sides of refrigerators for the tubing. Half the items in his notebook still hadn't been crossed off. We're not even close to getting in the air, are we? Jed asked. Closer than it looks. Riggs scratched 4 items off the list and drew a few arrows. We don't need everything on here to lift her off the piles. Just get me that tubing. Jed pictured the steamboat war zone. Copper and iron will be here any minute. Riggs gave a single laugh. Of course they will. What do you want me to do about it? We should hide. Jed scanned the skies for movement. Are you crazy? I'm not leaving the ship. Do you know what they'll do to it? Strip it bare and turn it to scrap. Better than iron prisons or dying. Riggs tapped the list. We have time. We can make it. He crossed another item off the list. Maybe if I pull turbine fans and swap the coolant generator with... It's not worth it. Riggs snapped his notebook shut. This is my home. I'm not leaving my home. Jed pointed to the skyline. If warships start showing up, you could easily jump down and hide under some bucket. But what about the captain? He won't be able to run. Riggs rubbed his eyes. If I can just find... He lifted a sheet of metal. How sure are you that she'll even get off the ground? Riggs looked at the cracked smokestack, broken propellers, and fractured hull. I don't know. We need to get the captain and find a place to hide, Jed said. We'll fix her up as soon as the warships leave. Riggs reread his list before kicking a copper pipe sticking out of the deck. Fine. Start gathering cans. I'll get the captain. Jed hurried to the mess and grabbed a hiking pack. Sorry, Pavel. No berries and syrup if we're going to last longer than a day. He filled the pack with corned beef hash, beef stew, chili, sweetened condensed milk, and tuna with oil. He hefted the pack on his shoulders and marched up the stairs. Here, take the captain, Riggs said. I need to find the others. Riggs took the bag of food, and Jed replaced him as a crutch. The captain leaned against Jed and hopped on his uninjured leg. Jed stumbled against the weight. Of course they sent the runt to carry me, the captain said. Despite his effort to lighten the mood, apprehension bled into his voice. You doing okay there? Riggs is gathering the others. Jed managed to say between steps. I'll be fine. Just keep moving. The stowaway hatch is buried. We'll need to jump from the main deck. Jed paused to catch his breath. The main deck? The stairs in front of him looked twice as long as they normally did. Okay. He sucked in a breath and lifted under the captain's arm. Come on. His words left his mouth in labored bursts. I can climb ladders faster than you can walk. Jed half carried, half dragged the captain up the stairs. When they reached the main deck, they both collapsed onto the floor. Jed stood and stared at the junk below them. We're going to need help, Jed said. The captain didn't respond. His eyes were frozen on the horizon. Dark clouds billowed in the distance. They bubbled and churned, swirling together like a junk storm. Jed checked his wrist. The watch hands were still. Captain Bogg shook his head. That's not a storm. Jed looked closer. The black clouds hovered, dense and impenetrable in the distance. Falcons? Jed asked. Captain Bogg shook his head again. Dreadnoughts. Hundreds of them. Chapter 24. Ooh, little sprocket. Spyglass's sing-song voice sounded like shattering glass. I told you I was patient. My legs are coming, and I'm so very hungry. Adrenaline surged through Jed. He hooked the captain's arm around him. Move! They limped forward. Don't go far, Spyglass said to Jed. I've got plans for you, too. The red light was back, blinking steadily on Spyglass as if it was winking at Jed. When they reached the railing, Jed peered over the side. The ladder, Captain said. Jed shook his head. You won't be able to make it down the ladder. He spotted the crew in the distance. Riggs! Riggs! They were too far away. Even if they heard him, they couldn't make it back before the dreadnoughts arrived. Captain Bogg pulled away from Jed. Get off the ship! Get to the others and hide! I'm not leaving you behind. The captain drew his fist back and cracked it against Jed's skull. Jed's vision flickered and he stumbled. Get off the ship, Captain Bogg yelled. Go! Jed pulled the rope ladder into the ship. What are you doing? The captain asked. Shut up! Jed looped its end around the captain's waist. Get this off me! The captain pulled at the rope, then drew back to strike at Jed again. Jed kicked him in the leg between the splints. Captain Bogg howled and clutched his broken leg while Jed tied the rope. Jed reached into the captain's pocket and he took his can opener. Hide yourself when you get down there. The captain looked up from his leg. When I get down where? Jed took a deep breath and shoved the captain over the railing. When he was about to slam into the junk, the rope ladder pulled taut. The captain grunted and his body swayed above the ground. My turn. Jed stepped onto the ladder, but as he pulled his full weight on the rope began to tear. He scrambled back into the ship. Get ready! He pressed the blade of the can opener against the rope and began sawing. The captain's weight helped the fibers tear easily. The strands snapped. There was a solid thunk as the captain hit the junk pile. Captain Bogg groaned, then hollered, You ever do something like that again, I'll pull off your eyelids! Fumes seeped into the air. The dreadnought fleet was nearly on top of them. Jed, get down here, the captain yelled. Get off that deck, they're going to see you. Jed straddled the railing. It was too high to jump. He bolted to the lower decks and hauled the mattress from the captain's bed. He'd spent all his energy carrying the captain, and now his breath was short and his muscles wobbled. Almost there. He lifted the mattress high and ran. What are you doing? Captain Bogg called. Jed flipped the mattress over the edge and leaped from the deck. Air rushed over his face. His stomach dropped. He landed with a chest-shattering impact. The force was so powerful, Jed wondered if he'd missed the mattress and hit a boulder instead. He coughed and struggled to suck in air. Go! Captain Bogg yelled. Jed crawled to his feet, barely able to breathe. He searched for the captain, but couldn't see him. You trying to give away my location? Captain Bogg called. Because if you stick around any longer, you will. Jed stopped looking and ran. The sky darkened above him as dreadnoughts surrounded the tugboat. A fleet of ships stained black from the smog lingering around the hulls like ghostly cocoons. An angry orange glowed through the cracks and seams as if inside each ship was a giant furnace. A pair of hands wrapped around Jed's face and yanked him to the ground. Get down, Sprocket whispered. Where's the captain? Hiding by the ship. Where's everyone else? Riggs sent Shay and me to find you two. Then those showed up. She motioned to the circle of dreadnoughts. Why are they all here? Jed asked. Sprocket shook her head. I don't know, but the ground will be swarming with dread any second. You have to get to the captain, he said. They're going to find him. If we step 1 foot out there, they'll find us too. She tightened her grip on Jed's arm. Right now, you do what I say. Got it? But he's... Sprocket squeezed and Jed winced. This is what I do, and I'm really good at it, okay? Okay. Like scampering mice, they ducked from cover to cover. Sprocket led the way over loose junk, avoiding gaps and unsteady footholds. Jed matched her steps. A sound echoed from below. Psst! Shay smiled up at Jed from underneath a lawnmower. Down here! Sprocket lifted the mower, revealing a wide cavity. They crawled inside and covered the opening. Round pleather seats and small windows lined the wall of the cavity. It was a school bus, toppled on its side and buried under a heap of junk. We couldn't reach the captain, Sprocket said. I can, Shay said. I'm a sneaky mouse. Sprocket shook her head. Too dangerous. Sprocket's right, Jed said. We just have to hope the dread don't find him. He crawled to the window and shifted the lawnmower to see. They were barely 100 feet from the tug. He could still see Bessie's smokestack and Spyglass's head chanting into the open air. Send down the lines, it shouted, so I can slurp up the soup inside those pink flesh bags. Something above them popped, and a cable shot from a dreadnought. A spike at its tip impaled the junk, and the cable pulled taut. As soon as the first cable landed, hundreds more followed. Lines whistled through the air, anchoring into the piles all around them. The cables began to quiver as dread crawled from the ships and began to descend. They were like Pavel's story. Limping figures sewn together with twisted patches of metal, scraps of steel wired to skin, spinning gears in place of muscle. They hit the ground like rain on a tin rooftop. One crunched into the junk by the mower. It had a mop for one of its legs, a birdcage for a chest, and a garden trowel for a hand. Two other dread had limbs made from fire extinguishers, broken axles, metal beams, and crude rusting scraps. They hobbled along the uneven junk with a clatter. The dread turned toward Spyglass and began to creep aboard the tugboat. They piled at the ship's base, climbing on top of each other to board. Spyglass, a dread muttered. It's Captain Spyglass. The word Spyglass trickled through the mob, each of them chanting it and peering over the dread in front to see. Everyone stop mumbling, and one of you weevil-eating maggots get me a body, Spyglass shouted. Now! An unseen dread in the center of the swarm screeched, and metal parts scattered into the air. A dread lifted a headless body into the air. Here, here, this one, right here, take this one, it shouted. Too short, Spyglass called, and not ugly enough. Pick again. Another dread screeched, and a moment later its headless body was lifted above the crowd for approval. This one, he's a good one, I swear, was my deckmate, strong bones, tall, ugly as slug snot. I would have stolen his body for myself if I didn't want you to have it. Spyglass studied the offering. Very well. Bring it up here and get me off this post. The dread dragged the headless body to the deck while others scampered to the smokestack to retrieve the head mounted to the stack. One of them touched the red, flashing button. It stopped flashing, and the spyglass retracted. Spyglass was quickly fastened to his new body. He stretched his new limbs and examined himself. He pulled a shatterbox from his boot and nodded. Who found me this body? A dread scrambled forward. I did. Name's Grom. You said you wanted to steal this body for yourself? Well, yes, but not now. Now it's yours. I wanted to... Spyglass aimed the shatterbox at Grom and fired. Metal parts burst along the neck. Sorry, Grom. I can't have crew wanting to steal my new legs. Did anyone else want this body? Anyone? Him! A dread shouted. Duzak here wanted it too. You liar, Duzak yelled, swinging the shovel that was his arm into the dread's face. Spyglass lifted his shatterbox and shot them both. Anyone else? He waited, but not another dread spoke. Good. Now where's your captain? A dread, its body at least as tall as Spyglass's, walked forward. The swarm parted as he approached. Captain Lurg, the dread said with a nod. I'm captain of Dreadnought 188. I think you're mistaken, Spyglass said. He raised his shatterbox again and pulled the trigger. A crack filled the air, and black smoke snaked up from the barrel. Lurg crumpled to the floor. Because it looks like I'm captain of the 188. He looked at the nearest dread. Wouldn't you agree? Aye, captain, the dread said without hesitation. Spyglass nodded. Good. Any of you chin scabs hear differently? No. Perfect, he said, not waiting for a response. Now listen up. I'm starving, and there's 3 little flesh bags hiding about the piles that I'm particularly interested in. One is a duck-kneed shoe wipe with a broken leg. The other is a sweet little darling I made a promise to. And the third is a special boy I'd like to get to know better. Find them. The swarms slipped off the ship and began digging, searching. There's thousands of them, Jed said. They're going to find us. Quiet, Sprocket said. As one of the dread searched the junk near the tug, its back legs snapped in half. Then something launched it skyward. There, there, the dread shouted. Found one, there. 3 dreads scrambled into the space and hauled Captain Bog to his feet. They carried him up the mound and delivered him to Spyglass. The crowd chittered in excitement. Ah, the mighty Captain Bog, Spyglass said. Such a big and brave spitweasel. How strong and brave are you now? Captain Bog lunged forward and struck Spyglass in the face. Dread scrambled to yank him back and restrain his arms. The captain snorted and spit onto Spyglass's cheek. Even at this distance, Jed could see the wad of saliva splash against the leathery forehead and roll down the nose. Spyglass didn't flinch. He didn't even wipe the spit from his face. Your face looks better mounted on a stack, he said. Perhaps yours will too, Spyglass said. I want his arm, a pirate shouted, waving the mangled rolling pin attached to his elbow. Spyglass shook his head. This bladder-scabbed cockroach is mine. First I want him tied to the mast and baked in the sun just like I was, thanks to him. Take him to the ship and find the others. Dread scampered from the tug and returned to the piles to dig. A small group stayed to stuff Captain Bog into a tight black sack and drag him along the junk floor to one of the hanging lines. They tugged on the line, and it lifted Captain Bog and the Dread into the ship. Jed, Shay, and Sprocket stayed silent inside the bus. The Dread dug under them, to their left, to their right, and walked right over them, but none noticed the 3 silent mice in the school bus. Then one of the burrowers turned around and headed straight for them. We need to get out of here, Jed whispered to Shay. Now. She shook her head. They'll see us and snap. Put us straight into mousetrap bags like Ugly Mouse. I don't want to go into a mousetrap bag. The tunneling Dread burrowed closer. That's why we need to find somewhere else to hide, Jed said. They're almost on top of us. Sprocket nodded. We need to go. The lawnmower flipped aside. A Dread, both eye sockets empty and black, stared at them. Run, Jed said. He jumped up and shoved the creature. The 3 climbed from the bus and sprinted. Dread closed in on them from all angles. They were everywhere, as if they were the fog itself. There's nowhere to go, Sprocket yelled. Jed looked in every direction. She was right. There was nowhere to go. A hand grabbed his elbow and yanked. Get off me! Jed kicked at the Dread. His foot collided with a copper pipe and broke it from its shoulder. But another Dread was already holding his arm again, and his legs. They carried him to the tugboat and dumped him in Sprocket before Spyglass. Jed looked around for Shay. Where was she? Had they found her? Hello, darling, Spyglass said to Sprocket. If I recall, we have plans for a date, you and I. That is, if I ever manage to find new legs. He looked down, which I now appear to have. I want you to know how much I'm going to enjoy this. All right, so this is a little crazy. When we started this, I thought, oh, here they are looking for Jed's parents, and they're finding all kinds of interesting information. And now they've crashed, and they're being descended upon by the dread. And I'm not sure there's a way out for them. But there's still a few chapters left. Right now we're in chapter 25, and there are 37. And some of these seem to be getting a little smaller as we go along, since I read 3 or 4 of them today. So we'll be back in a few days with some more. In the meantime, have a great summer break. See you soon.